This morning I'm going to do things a little differently than I normally do. I am going to tell you a story. It's a story that's in the Bible, but if you go through all of it, and all the scriptures, it would have to be a revival meeting rather than a church meeting. And so, this morning I want to take a look at the life of Jacob. I was telling the folks on Wednesday night that I just find Jacob to be the most intriguing of all the fathers of our faith. You know, when God tells Moses, I am the father of Abraham, Jacob. I am the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. And when he tells them all of that, he's including those faithful fathers of Israel. And I just find him to be certainly maybe the most interesting. He and Joseph, his grandfather, Abraham, wasn't really a complex individual. I mean, if you look at his life, he just simply obeyed. God called out to him. He probably didn't know God from any other thing that he worshipped, except all of a sudden, here was God talking to him and told him, hey, listen, I want you. And he just did, you know. And every time God told him to do something, he just did it. And so Abraham simply obeyed. The Apostle Paul said that Abraham's faith, and I really like to describe faith as the willingness to act upon God's wishes. Because faith takes action. And so, Paul says, Abraham's faith was counted to him as righteousness. God said, do it, and Abraham obeyed. Jacob's father, Isaac, was an even simpler person. Isaac trusted. Seems like he trusted everybody. Have you met people like that they just easily trust everybody around them? I mean, when Abraham took Isaac to the top of the mountain, I think when I was a kid, how many of you people, when you heard the story of Abraham taking his son Isaac to the top of the mountain, when you were young, believed that he was like an 8-year-old boy? Anybody? You thought he was young? Nobody thought he was young. He was actually probably around 20. He was old enough to get away from his 110, 120 years old father. He was old enough to not be willing to be bound and placed upon an altar with wood underneath him. But he did it. You never even hear a word of, hey, Pops, what's going on? In fact, the only word out of Isaac was, where was on the way up the mountain? Isaac said, well, we've got the wood, and there's the altar up there, but where's the sacrifice? That's it. And later on, Abraham tells Isaac to go with one of their servants to find him a wife. And he just does it. Okay, we're going to go shopping. Right? Like going to Kmart, Blue Light Special, going to get a wife. You know, it's amazing. He just said, okay. Jacob, however, is very different. His early life can take us to a firm debate on, I don't know how many of you will remember this from your high school days. Maybe you young ones can remember it. Nature versus nurture, right? That was something we used to always talk about in high school science class. We talked about it in college in the psychology course. The idea of how much genetics influences our behaviors versus how much does the way that we're taught and brought up and the things around us. So let's go to the 25th chapter of Genesis. And it starts out, the children, 2 of them, struggled together within her. And she said, if it is to be this way, why do I live? So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the elder shall serve the younger. And when her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy mantle. So they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. I was just reading to Paula last night that some lady in Texas did you read this? Gave birth to 3 sets of twins within 9 minutes. She had sextuplets, and they were all 3 sets of twins. And she did it all in 9 minutes. It's amazing. And I know you women that recently give birth are going, oh no! But she's having like a tough time here in this birth. And let's not forget that she too is rather far along. And so, when we picture that, Jacob kind of means struggle, grabber, and that's what his whole life is really consists of. I always worry about it, when you go to name your animals, and you name them things that seem to point towards their personalities. And I always wonder how much, because I've had animals that I should have probably named Henri, or, Biter, Ayla. But in the olden days, that's how they named their people, their children. They named them after obvious traits that they could see, and especially if it was right off the bat. And so one was named Red, or Red Fur, and the other one's named Grabber. But you can gain the insight on Jacob's whole life. In the very first part of that passage, it says, the children struggled together within her. Jacob's whole life is exemplified by struggle, and his birth is a perfect picture of that struggle. And just as he will spend his early life grabbing at his brother's birthright, Jacob comes out grabbing onto Esau's heel. That would tend to tell us that nature does have something to do with our personalities, right? Because it seems like it's an inborn, already taken place thing in his personality. And let me tell you, when I think about our nation's division right now over abortion, and I read this about babies born with their personalities already somewhat set, that just grieves me all the more. But then we're going to start to see the nurture side of things take over. In verse 27 and 28, it says, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. I don't know if I've ever asked this here. I know I did at Long Beach. Is there anybody here, how many people here have siblings growing up? All right. How many people here felt like your parents liked your sibling more than you? Okay. How many people here growing up knew that their parents liked their sibling more than you? Yeah. Yeah. See, I don't know that they did this on purpose, but each parent picked a child. Isaac picked the one that plays football and golf, and So, whatever. He picked the manly kind of man. And Jacob was more of a video game type of guy. I'll stay home, sitting in the hut, watching mom do the chores, maybe learning how to cook. By the way, that's how I learned how to cook. Esau was a daddy's boy, and Jacob was a mama's boy. So you have to understand what the customs were for that time and how it worked. The firstborn son, even if it was only by seconds, was normally owed what they call the birthright. We don't even have that right today. But upon his father's death, he would become the head of the household. All of the household. Because everybody stayed together in little tribes. And so he would have charge of all that his father had owned. And the younger siblings would be under his care, but also under his rule. And he would also receive a special covenant with God. So one day Esau is out in the field, and he's roughing it, and he's been out trying to hunt, but he hasn't gotten anything. I guess that's where a hunter would say it's called hunting, not catching, right? That's what they talk about fishing. It's called fishing, not catching. I assume hunting is the same way. I've never been hunting. But he's been out all day, and he's starving, and he comes in, and he smells that soup, whatever it was that Jacob had been cooking. And he says, "Hey, bro, let me have some of your soup." And Jacob says, "Well, if you want my soup, sell me your birthright. Sell me your birthright." That's conniving, isn't it? And he says, "Well, I'm starving to death. What good does a birthright do for me?" "Sure." And Jacob said, "Swear to me." Now, let me tell you that, first of all, in our vernacular, when people swear, it means an entirely different thing, right? Just go to the golf course. You can hear it. But when people swore an oath back then, it was binding. Far more binding than it is today. So today we'd say, do you have it in writing? Right? But it wasn't like that. He had him swear. So he swears, and then his father a little later is getting ready to go meet his maker, and he says, "Have Esau bring me some of that game that I love." The way he makes it, I just love the way it tastes. And so Esau goes out to hunt. Well, Rebekah, Jacob's mom, says, "Come here. Listen, while he's out hunting, it's going to take him a while. You know, half the time he doesn't catch anything anyway. But, so, while he's out doing that, let's just make something. We'll get one of the animals here, and we'll dress it up to taste like what your dad likes. And you go in." And he says, "He's going to touch me. He knows what Esau feels like and smells like." And she said, "No problem." And so they put like animal fur around his arms and stuff, so that when his dad would reach out and grab him, he would feel that fur. His dad was blind and couldn't see anything, and so they used that to their advantage. And so he goes in and fools Isaac, and Isaac gives him the elder son's blessing. Basically, making that covenant with God, giving Jacob everything, and Esau basically nothing. And then when Esau comes back with that game, he says, "Dad, here you go." Dad said, "What do you mean, here you go? You already gave it to me earlier." He said, "No, I didn't." And of course, then it dawns on him. He said, "I'm sorry, son, but Jacob took everything already that you would have gotten." Now, might that make you a little irritated? We know that people, I don't know how many of you have gone through this. I have, upon the death of your parents, separating all the stuff and dissolving homes and all this kind of stuff, and you hear humongous fights. We didn't really have that, but I understand how it can be so overwhelming. But this, he was just Esau's fit to be tied. Because not only did he steal his birthright, that first thing with the food that he swore, but now he's stolen his blessing from his father. And he says, "I'm going to kill him." And Rebekah heard this, so she tells her son, "Listen, one of the things Mom and Dad didn't like about Esau was that Esau had married Canaanite women. And that really irritated them, that they married women outside of the Israelite nation, which really wasn't in completion yet. But so she said, "I'm going to send you to my brother Laban, and you can marry one of his kids, girls." And so off he goes to see Laban. Interestingly, I don't need this anymore. Interestingly, in Laban, he finds a guy with the same personality he has. Have any of you been irritated enough that you've actually found someone that has your same personality traits? I don't know about you, I don't know everybody, but most of the time when God puts a couple together, they have completely different personality traits, strengths, weaknesses, all of those kinds of stuff. If you put two Slavs together, the house will be in a Hoarders episode within months. But if you put someone that's clean and someone, everything kind of works its way out. But if you put two people together that have the exact same personality, they are going to rub on each other and really find it very difficult to get along. And that's what's happened. And so Laban puts him in charge of their flocks, and God blesses Jacob in everything that he does, and the flocks all grow and stuff like that. But Jacob's flock gets bigger. And I won't go into all the reasons, but his flock gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And Laban starts to get tired of it. And the reason that Jacob is working for him is he's working 7 years for Laban's daughter, Rachel, whom he absolutely adored. It was love at first sight. It was just like me and Paul. Love at first sight. Well, me, not so much her. But he just absolutely loved Rachel. He said, "I'll work 7 years." And so, at the end of that 7 years, here she comes, got the bridal thing on. Turns out Dad slipped in the oldest sister. Well, she has to get married first. He had no idea. He got married to her, hadn't seen her face. Oh, man. So they worked it out. He'll work another 7 years, and Dad gives him Rachel. So he's got these two sisters. We have a show called that, don't we? Sister Wives? Yes. So he's got the two sisters. And his flocks are growing. And he realizes Laban's getting irritated at the fact that his flock has gotten bigger than Laban's. And so he packs up the kids. They've got some kids now, and they all take off. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, have you ever You know the story of Jacob's ladder? When he was out and he's laying there in the desert and he sees a vision of angels going up and down this ladder from heaven to earth. And I thought, well, now we know normal angels don't have wings, right? Because they got to use that ladder. They'll fly all around everywhere. But he's envisioning God and knows that God is in this place. And then he's on his way back and realizes, uh-oh, I'm going to have to face Esau. And when I left, he wasn't very happy with me. And so he sends off the women and children. He puts them on the other side of the river. And he goes by himself and he lays down there. And a man, it says, we have no idea whether it was an angel. Some people believe it was Jesus. Whatever it was, likely an angel. Just says a man came and wrestled with Jacob. It says Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket. And Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans, and have prevailed." Did you get you? So he's wrestling with this guy. And always before, he's been striving with his brother, with Laban, and his whole life is full of just striving and struggling and just constantly grabbing at everything and trying to make things on his own. And then, when it doesn't work out, he runs away, right? And so what God does through the angel just touches his hip, and his hip goes out of joint. And Jacob is never able to run again. Can't run away from his problems. He's going to have to stand and face it. Many of us struggle with some of the things that God has told us to do. We struggle with not only the difficulties that arise around those things that God has asked us to do, but we struggle with the willingness to constantly being obedient. See, it's not any time you've given yourself to God, it's not a once and done kind of thing. It's a constant battling your own will and dying to self. That's why Jesus said, "Take up your cross daily." And so it's a constant thing about denying self, like I preached last week. Denying yourself and saying, no, it's your will. It's a struggle for most of us. Maybe you were like Isaac and you just trust, or like Jacob. And when God does do something, you just do it and you don't worry about it anymore. I was not like that. I don't have that temperament. My temperament is far more like Jacob. But did you notice something about the story? God says, "I am the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." The personality differences didn't change the fact that he was their God and that he used them. And here we saw, not only did he use Jacob as frustrating a guy as he must have been, but he's the one who they changed. That man said, "Your name now is Israel." And by the way, that means struggle. Struggles. And have they had struggles, huh? Again this week. Did you hear that? Again this week they're having struggles. But God used Jacob. That's what I find so great about the story of Jacob, is that, yeah, most of us really aren't like Abraham. And very few of us are so trusting like Isaac. But I understand Jacob. A contentious personality that wants to do what God wants him to do, but struggles with his inner self. I understand that. And God used him. I love that. God uses all sorts of different vessels. I don't know if any of you go into either Lowe's or Home Depot, their garden area, and you see all these different shapes of pots and things to put your plants in. I think about that sometimes, that we're like that. We're vessels that come in tons of different shapes and sizes. Some of us probably got molded very easily, whereas other ones you can see really struggled to come out of the oven. Because it was hard. And yet God will fill broken vessels. He can mend broken vessels and fill us. Isn't that great? That we don't have to be the guy just because our personality isn't the, you say do it, you say jump, I say how. We don't have to be the guy that says whatever you want to do. That'd be nice. Sure be easier on everybody around us too. But God can still use us, even if we're the people that have to learn the hard way that God knows better. Let's bow our heads. I don't know what you feel like your personality has been to God. It's amazing that though this is our church family, we sometimes hide what we feel like is our true self from the rest of the people here. That's kind of sad in a way, but maybe you're the type of person that struggles with giving up and letting God have control of your life. If you are, I can tell you it's going to make a whole lot harder on you and probably take longer. He'll still work with you, still loves you. But maybe it's time that you quit wrestling and said, okay, God, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. Maybe you don't have those kinds of problems. Maybe you're the easy, compliant child, as Dobson put it. Hey, that's great. God has some of those. Whatever, wherever you're at today, do it again. Take up your cross. The Apostle Paul said, I take up my cross daily. If the Apostle Paul, who wrote much of our New Testament, had to remind himself to do this daily, it's not such a bad thing to remind yourself of that. Today is the day to take up your cross again.